But right now, I want to go right to Josh Hammer. He's the host of the podcast on the First TV, which is where we're simulcasting this right now, by the way, as well. First TV, 347 on DirecTV, Roku, Pluto, the First TV app, firsttv.com. And we have a bunch of podcasts there too. And Josh Hammer is one of them. It's called America on Trial. And it's all about helping us make sense of all these lawsuits. There's so many of them. Like how can we juggle them all in our brain? And the media is just not telling you what's happening. It's amazing. Like every time I read even a New York Times article about it, they don't tell you, they don't even try to tell you what the case is about. They just go right into the implication, like the political implications of it, but no details. So that's why Josh Hammer is here to help us figure this out on his podcast, America on Trial. And he's with us right now. How you doing, Josh?
Mike, I'm doing great. It's always a pleasure to join you, my friend.
Good to talk to you. Give us the big picture accusation here. And then I read the 9 pages, so we can go into some of the details from there. But what's the big picture charge against Trump?
You know, Mike, there are a lot of cases against Trump right now. That is part of why my new show, America on Trial, is necessary. But of all the cases against Trump, I'm actually not sure that any of them are as utterly baseless and, even more important, as potentially chilling down the line than this current case right here, this so-called fraud case in New York. So just to kind of back up a little bit here, this case was already problematic right out the gate because the Attorney General of New York State, Tish James, when she was running for office, she was repeatedly campaigning on a platform of getting Trump by any means necessary. And sure enough, from day one in office, that is what she pursued. I mean, that right there, just from a 35,000-foot altitude level, it's fundamentally un-American. It reeks of Stalinist tactics, of the old Soviet mentality of show me the man and I will find you the crime. That's exactly what they've done here. And furthermore, what they've done in this fraud case is it's not even technically a prosecution. It's technically styled as a quote-unquote civil case that the state is nonetheless using taxpayer resources and public taxpayer-funded attorneys to pursue. So you might ask, okay, well, if this is not a criminal prosecution, if it's a civil case, then, well, surely there's got to be some victim here, right? And under the state's theory of the case, the alleged victims are very sophisticated financial parties, banks like Deutsche Bank, these mega bulge bracket institutions that were allegedly harmed by Donald Trump and the Trump organization's alleged efforts to overinflate their asset value and therefore to secure more favorable bank loans and to basically rip off these companies. Here's the problem, Mike. The problem is that there are no victims here. None of these companies actually lost money when it came to their dealings with Trump. On the contrary, Deutsche Bank, which I just named, they actually made a nice, tidy profit. And if I'm not mistaken, they actually wanted even more business with Donald Trump and the Trump organization. And they actually even factor in a so-called haircut when it came to the property appraisal of Trump's triplex at Trump Tower, for instance. Based on what Trump told them, they then did a standard haircut to kind of deflate the value a little bit, standard banking practice. So there's no victims here. It's a victimless crime. And they've smacked this $355 million damage nonetheless on Trump personally and the Trump organization, an additional $4 million apiece in personal liability for both Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr., and then another $1 million on Alan Weisselberg, the longtime CFO of the Trump organization. Donald Trump himself is barred from being an officer in any corporation in New York State for 3 years. Eric and Don Jr., the same for 2 years. But as I was saying just a few minutes ago, to me, Mike, the even most chilling part of this very chilling legal affair is the possible ramifications this is going to have mid to long term. If you are a CEO thinking of locating a business, if you are a venture capitalist thinking of deploying money, if you are a prospective entrepreneur, that's Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, and operating a business in your garage. If you are any of those things, why in the world would you go ahead and now locate your business in New York State after you've seen what the power of the state can be used to do to try to besmirch and to frankly try to bankrupt your business, all because they don't like the way that you subjectively appraised your value, even if the banks themselves still made a nice, tidy profit. It's really, really crazy banana republic stuff, frankly.
This is a Breitbart. Even the New York Times agreed that it could not find a single case in history where this statute in New York was used against an individual or a company that did not commit a criminal offense, go bankrupt, or leave financial victims. So is the argument that Deutsche Bank could have made a bigger profit if Trump was not overinflating the value of his assets?
I think that basically is the argument, yes. I mean, that is what state that the argument is that no matter, even if there are no true victims here, no one is pleading that they lost a lot of money in their business dealings with Trump or anything like that. They could have made even more money. Maybe they would have known better and not engaged in business in the first place if they had known that their profits would have been comparatively lower based on the interest rates they gave out. But, I mean, Mike, you and I both know what's going on here. I mean, what's actually going on here is that this has nothing to do with any of that, and that this has to do with the fact that New York State has unfortunately become a very far-left institution statewide when it comes to the people who hold power in Albany. Now, it's worth pointing out as a purely political matter, there are some small glimmers of hope. I mean, Lee Zeldin lost that statewide in the 2022 midterms when he was running for governor against Kathy Hochul. He lost it by a very, comparatively small margin. It was like 5 to 6 points or something along those lines there. But right now, unfortunately, Tish James in particular, the attorney general there, you saw Kathy Hochul, the governor, come out yesterday and try to do mop-up duty and try to tell people, oh, if you're a businessman, don't worry about this ruling as long as you're non-violation of the law. But what she's really saying, Mike, she's winking and nodding at the camera. What she's really saying is, as long as your last name is not Trump, as long as your last name is not Trump, then don't worry about it because we're not actually going to use your state resources to try to bankrupt you and your organization. But it's deeply, deeply offensive to Donald Trump on a personal level as well, because this cuts to the core of his entire life's work. His entire life's work has been building a name for himself in New York. New York City is where he rose to prominence. That's where all the buildings are named: Trump Tower, Trump this, Trump that. He's from Queens himself. So it really cuts to the core. And I think you can't take away that emotional aspect here from what's going on as well. They're really trying not necessarily just to bankrupt him and ultimately to remove him from public life. They clearly are trying to do all those things. They're also trying on a very human level to just fundamentally crush the man and deflate his ego, I think.
We're talking with Josh Hammer. The podcast is America on Trial. Can we go into a couple of the examples here? Because, that's big picture and that's perfectly explained, but I still didn't get it. I was like, what do you, so here's some examples that they outline in the verdict. So 40 Wall Street, this is my first go-to one. I think this is the easiest to understand. And I'm going to push back here a little bit, right? I'm going to take the stance that, well, there is deceit here, Josh. So, and there's an obligation that the state has to make sure that everyone is somewhat truthful in order to have honest dealings in a free marketplace. All right. So 40 Wall Street, iconic building, beautiful building. Everyone's seen it. It says here that there was a bank-ordered appraisal for the property of $220 million. Yet the statement that year and the next, they valued it at $530 million. And then they went to Ladder Capital Finance and said it's valued at $540 million. And they got a loan based off of that value. That's what happened at 40 Wall Street. But that's deceitful, isn't it, Josh?
So, look, I mean, Mike, I'm not going to put myself in a position where I'm, offering apologia for all of Donald Trump's things over the course of his life. He's led a very checkered and colorful life filled with, many statements and many activities and affairs and this and that, things that I wouldn't necessarily endorse. So, I definitely don't want to put myself in the position of having to explain away everything necessarily that he has done or has directed his organization to do there. But what I will say is, and I don't own commercial real estate myself, perhaps one day, but based on my understanding as to how this works, it's fairly common practice to inflate your assets over what a standard financial institution might value them at. Now, we could quibble as to whether the difference between X and Y is standard or whether that's too much of an inflation. I mean, based on the numbers that we just heard there, it does seem like there's a serious inflation going on there, right? And is that ethical? Is it unethical? It's probably not the most ethical thing in the world if we're just being fully transparent there. Maybe they have some sort of information that the bank didn't have to justify it, and maybe they didn't there. But I think the key point here is that, again, these counterparties that the Trump organization is dealing with. I mean, 40 Wall Street, as you mentioned, it's an iconic building. It's not like when you're securing loans or taking out debt or any kind of collateral related to an institution like 40 Wall Street. It's not like you're dealing with a mom and pop shop. I mean, you're not dealing with kind of the local banker with Jimmy Stewart and It's a Wonderful Life or anything like that. I mean, you're dealing again with companies like Deutsche Bank. You're dealing with the major bulge bracket institutions that have thousands, tens of thousands of employees, that have exceptional credit rating, that are recruiting from the greatest universities. It's just very, very difficult to try to feel particularly bad for these people. And surely they have the people equipped to make the property appraisal estimates for themselves and to hand out bank loans accordingly. And then again, to kind of go back to our previous conversation, it's not like anyone actually lost value here as well. So, look, there's a little bit of blame to go around here. It's not like the Trump organization acted perfectly or anything like that there. But at the barest of bare minimum, to kind of paraphrase what the Wall Street Journal wrote in their editorial over the weekend on this affair, it's like using a Hellfire missile where a .22 rifle would do. And that's a paraphrase, but at a bare minimum, the remedy here certainly does not fit the magnitude of the alleged offense.
Yeah. When a couple of years ago, I got a HELOC on the house, and like if I called the bank and they said, "Hey, what's your house valued at?" And I said $100 million. There's no way they'd say, "Great, here's $50 million for your HELOC." Like they did an appraisal. Like they swung by and they checked out Zillow and they did a little due diligence to give me my $20K. I'm pretty sure that these giant banks would do some sort of due diligence on 40 Wall Street before they go ahead and give a $1 billion loan or whatever it is. So that's absurd to think otherwise. All right, well, then they got it. They won that one. Is it true that he has to pay before he can appeal?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the exact, if it's the entire full sum. It may well be. It's going to depend on the intricacies of the underlying New York State statute and some nitty-gritty details of New York State law. But he's going to have to cough up something for sure. I mean, he's not going to be able to just get off scot-free pending appeal. The silver lining for Trump, the solace, is that it doesn't get a whole lot more biased than this trial judge, Arthur Engoron. He really kind of let the cat out of the bag here. He was vehement in his explanation earlier at trial that this would not be a jury trial, that it would just be a judge trial. From my perspective, I was not personally entirely fully convinced as to why that necessarily made a ton of sense. Then he just had various statements throughout the course of the trial proceedings that really kind of gave away his bias. He also, very early on during the proceedings, pronounced seemingly out of the blue that Donald Trump and the Trump organization were indeed liable of fabricating things on their financial statements. So all along, this was kind of a false suspense drama. We were kind of just waiting to find out what the actual number would be. It was never a question, unfortunately, as to whether they would be found liable one way or the other. So all that to say that this judge really was kind of out there on the pretty far anti-Trump, far left end of the spectrum. The solace and the silver lining for the Trump organization is that when it comes to the New York State court system, the appeals courts, the appellate courts, they're not exactly bastions of Reaganite conservatism, but they're at least a little more fair and balanced, just given New York State's long history of having many corporate clients and businesses there. So I think the Trump organization has a chance of, at a bare minimum, getting that number down quite a bit on appeal.
Okay, it'll be interesting to see how much he has to pay up front, though, because damage still done. Getting a bunch of emails here, people asking who gets that money, that $354 million, and then Breitbart here says $450 million with interest. But whatever it is, who gets that money?
It's going to be the discretion of New York State because, I mean, again, this is a victimless crime, and they are the ones who are pursuing this. They've been pursuing this when it comes to taxpayer dollars. I mean, but that's going to be a very important thing to follow up on. This is a lot of money there. There were taxpayer resources that went into pursuing this case there. If you are Republicans in Albany, and the Democrats certainly control the New York State legislature in Albany, but this would be a good use of your investigative power. This would be a good use of your subpoena power to make sure to track what happens to each and every penny here. And, we have some good fiscal transparency organizations on our side, Mike. There's one organization that comes to mind called openthebooks.com. It's run by this great guy out in Illinois named Adam Andrzejewski, and they dedicate their entire organization to tracking public dollars. So I imagine that this is the kind of situation that they will be all over as well there. But given the fact that there are no victims, and Deutsche Bank or companies like that didn't even bring this lawsuit, there's no obvious way, or there's no obvious reason why they would necessarily be entitled to any of this money. So I think it's going to ultimately be the discretion of big Democratic Party machine actors in Albany, which is not exactly reassuring, but hopefully Republicans there are going to be on top of this.
Well, all the more incentive for them to do it again next time they feel like it. Let's pivot to Atlanta and Fani Willis, the district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia. Bring us up on this soap opera drama of what's happening with her and how this affects the case.
Well, it was really wild, wasn't it? I mean, you had this 2-day hearing on Thursday and Friday, and from my perspective, it was the first day, the Thursday hearing, the day that got all the headlines. I mean, that was the day that both Nathan Wade and Fani Willis went up there and did their thing. First of all, I can't believe that whoever told Fani Willis to go ahead and take the stand, I can't believe that person thought that would be a good idea, given the way that Fani Willis then acted on that stand there. I mean, she came across as highly emotional, as highly unhinged, frankly, just not smart. I mean, she was literally questioning what continent the country of Belize was on, and the Bahamas, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, Mike, not to pull a Sarah Palin, but from where I live here in Florida, I can almost see the Bahamas from my house. So I think, I think that answers that question right there away. So she looked absolutely terrible. And then to make matters even worse for her, the most substantive takeaway from the first day of the 2-day proceeding was when you had her former colleague there in the Fulton County, Georgia DA's office, someone who called herself a one-time good friend, a close friend of Fani Willis. This former good friend said that, according to her knowledge of the situation, that Fani Willis and Nathan Wade started shacking up as far back as 2019, which would, if true, if that is corroborated, if there is some sort of evidence, if there is some sort of evidentiary smoking gun that would corroborate that claim, that totally disproves what Nathan and Fani have been saying about how their affair didn't start until 2022. After Fani had tapped Nathan to be the special prosecutor on the case. So there's already this he said, she said over the very kind of specific question as to when their affair started. But to kind of zoom out a little bit here, Mike, when you have allegations of this nature, when you have an affair of this nature, when you have the fact that Nathan Wade, who's pocketed $650,000 in taxpayer cash, was he just benefiting from his affair with Fani? When you have these questions hovering over a case of this magnitude, dealing with the prosecution of the former president and his former co-defendant on outrageous mafia-like RICO racketeering conspiracy, I mean, the whole case is marred. The whole case is marred out of the gate. And my reading of how the judge there, Scott McAfee, my reading of how the presiding judge was acting was that he seemed to be kind of giving Fani Willis the rope with which to hang herself. And it's not even remotely obvious to me how Fani Willis, it kind of cuts the chase here, how she can continue leading this prosecution. So, is Judge McAfee, again, is he a bastion of conservatism? No, of course not. But he seems to be operating that chambers right now in good faith when it comes to allowing these hearings to proceed. And based on what I saw, I have to conclude that Fani and Nathan are not going to be able to pursue these charges, which then raises the question as to where it goes from there. Does it stay in Fulton County? Does it go outside of Fulton County? Perhaps the case even ultimately is dropped. But certainly when it comes to those cases, last week was a very good week for former President Trump and his co-defendants.
It's amazing. Okay, so the legal analyst at CNN, Jeffrey Tobin, he said, "What's the big deal?" And I genuinely asked this too. Like, he said, so what if they had a relationship? Who cares? This doesn't affect what Donald Trump did or the accusations against Donald Trump. And who's this Wade guy? What is he exactly? So you have the district attorney, and then who's Wade? What is his job?
So Wade doesn't even work for Fulton County. He works outside of the Fulton County DA's office. He allegedly has experience in prosecuting racketeering RICO cases. So he was just tasked by Fani to be the special prosecutor leading this RICO prosecution against Trump and some of the key co-defendants.
Okay, so let's say, Josh, they happen to he's the best guy for the job. Okay, she just went out, hired the best, and it happens to be that they've had a relationship for a long time. Who cares what happens in their bedroom? What's the big deal?
Well, I mean, that probably is that's basically what they are forced to argue, right? I mean, if this claim is corroborated, that's going to have to be their claim there. Look, I mean, I guess the easiest way to respond to that, Mike, is the optics of that are just so unbelievably swampy, are just so unbelievably terrible there, that you're really going to find, I think, everyone but the most vehement, hardest, farthest left people that are going to just take a step back and wince and say, really? I mean, is this really kind of a fair use? Is this even a remotely fair use of taxpayer resources here? And to kind of make it a little more granular and specific than that, recall that in any criminal prosecution, you have to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. This, by the way, was one of the reasons why it struck me as more than a little unfair that this Tish James fraud case in New York was pursued as a civil case, not a criminal case, because that lowers the threshold. It's no longer beyond a reasonable doubt. But in a criminal case, it's going to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So back in Georgia, they're going to have to prove it to that very high standard, and they're going to have the unanimous jury pool. You can't have a hung jury there. So when you start getting into this situation with Fonnie and Nathan, where they shacking up, you're going to risk some jurors going wobbly, just based on the fact that already you can't sequester the jury. I mean, they've already seen these public hearings. They've seen this fairly crazy and deranged woman seemingly taking the witness stand, saying, "I'm not on trial. They're on trial for stealing an election." I mean, to a large extent, Mike, the damage has been done already, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Great point. So to Trump's benefit, maybe this could be pushed out of Fulton County, which, if it proceeds, would help him, and would slow down the case, push it back till after November, and then maybe even help him win in the end, right? Do you think it does leave Fulton County, or does it stay in Fulton County?
Well, if it stays in Fulton County at a bare minimum, then Fonnie can't prosecute it, right? But yeah, I don't see how it stays in Fulton County, honestly, because even if you tap one of her subordinates, even if you tap someone who works under her in the chain of command there, from my perspective, how is it any better? I mean, it's not like a subordinate who worked under her would, by definition, be unaware of what was going on. She presumably was aware of the fact that her boss, in starting this case 2.5 years ago, I think they first launched this investigation back in November 2021, a subordinate presumably would have been aware of the fact that Fonnie was then tapping this outside guy who she was having an affair with. So it seems to me like you probably have to move it outside of Fulton County if this case is going to continue at all there. Then the question is which jurisdiction is going to take it up. But Fulton County, which is where Atlanta is already by far the bluest county in the entire state of Georgia. So once you start talking about moving it outside of Fulton County, you're really, really escalating the probability, I should say, of getting a hung jury, because you're just not dealing with a deep blue jurisdiction anymore.
No, that's amazing. What a beautiful poetic thing to watch this come crashing down around them. Real quick, Josh, do you still have the view that no criminal charges will be wrapped up by November?
I think the Alvin Bragg trial in New York City could. That is the one that could get across the finish line. So that trial is coming up. They're starting jury selection on March 25th. They cleared the way for that on Thursday. Trump was actually in the courtroom in New York City for that last Thursday, where the judge, Juan Merchan, went ahead and signed off on March 25th as the first date for jury selection. That is the one that could actually do it. I'm not aware of.
That's the hush money one? That's the Stormy Daniels?
Correct, exactly.
Okay. But does he go to jail for that one?
Almost assuredly not, right? In theory, in theory, I think the underlying statutes could be read to include jail time, but no, even though it's technically a criminal prosecution, it would almost assuredly just entail some sort of fines or various other activities like that.
Okay, but you just say that's the one that will wrap up potentially before the election.
Correct. That is the one of the four that is by far the most likely to wrap up, I think. Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's, if you want to keep making sense of all this stuff, go check out the podcast, America on Trial with Josh Hammer. Josh, appreciate you, brother.
Anytime, Mike. Thank you.
Creep Up the Great Word. Thanks, man. Thanks for walking us through all this. America on Trial is the name of the podcast. Does any of this affect your vote at all? Well, let's go back to the deceitful inflating of assets. $450 million he has to pay. Unbelievable. $500 million. How could even, it doesn't matter how much money you have, coming up with $500 million cash is going to be hard. And that's all the point of it, right?